The day my son moved me into Brookhaven Senior Living, he called it the smart decision. He said it twice, actually, like repeating it would make it true. Once in the car, once in the parking lot, while a woman in scrubs waited by the automatic doors with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll like it here, Mom," Marcus said. "It's clean. It's close to Dana's office. You won't be alone anymore." I wasn't going to argue with him in front of strangers. I never do. That's not weakness. That's strategy. I looked up at the building. 3 stories of beige brick, new landscaping, a sign out front that said Brookhaven in gold letters, and I felt something Marcus would never have guessed. Not sadness, not defeat, recognition. I knew the slope of that parking lot before it was ever paved. I knew the exact spot where the old loading dock used to be, back when this building was a distribution warehouse, and I was 31 years old, signing my name on a deed my husband said I was too young to understand. Marcus didn't know that. Marcus didn't know a lot of things. He put his hand on my shoulder, gentle, the way you'd guide someone who might fall. "Ready?" I smiled at my son. "More than you think." He had no idea he'd just moved his mother into a building she still owned. "My name is Eleanor Voss. Everyone calls me Ellie, except my late husband Frank, who called me vice president, as a joke, because for 11 years, that's exactly what I was. Vice president of acquisitions at a regional real estate firm, back when women in that role were rare enough to get written about in the business section. I built things, not with my hands, with contracts, with patience, with an eye for property nobody else wanted yet. I bought warehouses when they were ugly. I bought strip malls before they were fashionable. Frank used to say I could see a building's future the way other people read weather. We raised 2 kids on that instinct. Marcus, our son, and Renee, our daughter, for years younger. I'm not a naturally suspicious person. I trust people until they give me a reason not to. That's probably my biggest weakness. I give reasons the benefit of the doubt long after the evidence has stopped earning it. My strength is patience. I don't react in the moment. I watch. I wait. I let people show me who they are, and then I remember it, quietly, for as long as I need to. By the time Frank passed 6 years ago, I was 71 years old, sharp as ever, and sitting on a modest but real portfolio of properties, most of it in trusts, some of it managed by a firm Frank and I had used for decades, and one piece of it, the Brookhaven building, held in an old LLC that hadn't seen a family conversation in over 15 years. Nobody asks their mother about paperwork from 1987. Why would they? Marcus was always the one people worried about, and worry, in our family, got mistaken for love. He struggled in school. He struggled with jobs. Every time he stumbled, Frank was there with a checkbook and a soft voice, saying, "He just needs a little more support than most." I said it too for years. I believed it too for years. Renee never stumbled the same way. She got a scholarship, moved across the country for it, built a quiet, steady life as a physical therapist. She called every Sunday. She never asked us for money. And somewhere along the way, that became the story we told about her, that she didn't need us. Nobody says the quiet part out loud, but I'll say it now. In our house, needing help got rewarded, and not needing it got ignored. When Marcus's first business failed, Frank co-signed a loan. When his second one failed, I quietly moved money from a trust account to cover it, without telling Renee, because Frank said, "There's no reason to worry your sister over this." By the time Marcus married Dana, he'd been bailed out 4 times that I know of. Maybe more that I don't. Frank started slowing down 2 years before he died. His memory went first, in small ways, forgetting where he'd parked, forgetting a name he'd known for 30 years. Marcus saw an opening in that. He started helping with paperwork, started sitting in on meetings with our accountant, started saying things like, "Mom, you shouldn't have to deal with all this at your age," in a tone that sounded like love and functioned like a door closing. I let it happen, because grief makes you tired, and tired makes you trusting. By the time Frank was gone, Marcus had power of attorney over some of our joint accounts, a decision made in a hospital hallway, under fluorescent lights, when I was in no state to read fine print. I don't blame myself for that. I was a wife saying goodbye to her husband of 44 years. I blame the son who chose that moment. What he didn't get power of attorney over, what he didn't even know existed, was Brookhaven. It started with a family meeting. Marcus called it that, like we were a company with a board. Dana sat beside him, notebook open, pen ready, the way she always did when she wanted to look organized instead of controlling. Renee joined by video call from 3 states away, her face small in the corner of Marcus's laptop screen. "Mom," Marcus started, "we've been talking, and we think it's time you considered some kind of assisted living." I set down my tea. "Considered it? Or already decided it?" Dana jumped in before Marcus could answer. "We just want what's safest for you. You had that fall in March." I tripped on a garden hose, Dana. "I didn't have a stroke." "It's not just that," Marcus said. "The house is a lot. The finances are a lot. I've been managing things, and it's a full-time job, Mom, on top of my actual job." There it was. Managing things. Like I was a rental property with a leaky roof. I looked at Renee's small face on the screen. "Did you know about this conversation before today?" She hesitated half a second too long. "Marcus mentioned it might come up." "Might come up. Now we discussed it as a family. Might come up, the way weather might come up." "I have a place already picked out," Marcus said. "Brookhaven. It's nice, Mom. Really nice." I toured it myself. I almost laughed. He'd toured a building I still legally owned and hadn't recognized a single thing about it. Not the bones of it. Not the shape of the hallways I used to walk with a hard hat on, back when it smelled like sawdust instead of lavender air freshener. "And if I say no?" I asked. Marcus's jaw tightened, just slightly. Dana's pen stopped moving. "Mom," he said, "I already have some of the paperwork started." That was the moment I understood this wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. The pressure didn't come as one big fight. It came the way water finds a crack, slow, constant, in places you don't expect. It came in the form of Marcus helping me sell the house, then quietly listing it $8,000 under what I knew it was worth, because the agent was a friend of Dana's and time was, in his words, of the essence. It came in the form of my monthly statements arriving later and later, then not at all, because Marcus told the bank he'd take care of forwarding those to save me the confusion. It came in the form of small comments at dinner. "Mom gets a little repetitive sometimes. She left the stove on last week." None of it was false, exactly. All of it was aimed. It came in the form of my grandkids, Marcus and Dana's too, being coached, gently, to ask me questions like, "Grandma, do you remember what day it is?" in front of other people, like it was a game, like it wasn't a performance for an audience I didn't ask for. Renee called me once during that stretch, quieter than usual. "Mom, is everything okay? Marcus mentioned you've been forgetting things." "I forgot to buy oat milk," I told her. "I don't think that's a diagnosis." She laughed, but it was thin. I could hear Marcus's version of events sitting behind her question like a shadow. He wasn't attacking me directly. He was building a file. A quiet, patient file, made of small stories that sounded reasonable on their own and devastating stacked together. The worst part wasn't the lies. The worst part was watching my son believe his own convenient version of events, the way people do when a lie makes their life easier. By the time the movers came, I had already stopped correcting him out loud. I'd started writing things down instead. 3 weeks after I moved into Brookhaven, my old attorney called, a woman named Priya Anand, who'd handled Frank's estate, and, before that, some of the original Brookhaven paperwork back when she was a junior associate barely out of law school. "Ellie," she said, "I got a strange request today. Someone from a property management company asked our office for records on an LLC, Ashgrove Holdings." "Your Ashgrove Holdings." My stomach dropped, but not with fear, with something closer to vindication. "Who asked?" "The facility's regional office. They're doing some kind of ownership audit before a refinance." "Ellie, did you know Brookhaven Senior Living operates out of a building owned by Ashgrove?" "I know," I said quietly. "I bought it in 1987. It's still mine." There was a pause on the line. "Does Marcus know?" Priya asked. "No. Does he know you're his landlord, essentially?" I looked out the window of my new room, in my building, at the parking lot where I used to stand with Frank, dreaming about warehouses nobody else wanted. "Not yet," I said. Priya pulled the old files that afternoon. Ashgrove Holdings had leased the building to a chain of operators over the decades, each lease renewing quietly, the rent flowing into an account Frank and I set up before either of our children were born. When Frank's memory started slipping, Marcus had gone hunting through every account he could find power of attorney over. He never found Ashgrove. It wasn't hidden out of secrecy. It was simply older than his interest in our finances. But there was more. Buried in the old file was something I hadn't thought about in years. A letter Frank wrote me the year before he died, tucked inside the Ashgrove paperwork like he knew, somehow, that I'd need it later. Priya read me the first line over the phone, her voice careful. Ellie, if our son ever tries to put you somewhere without asking you first, remember what you already own. I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time that night, in a room I was paying rent on without my son ever knowing whose pocket that rent was landing in. Knowing the truth and using it are two different things, and I've never been someone who rushes toward a confrontation before she's ready. So I waited. I watched. And in the meantime, Marcus kept building his convenient story, unaware the ground under it belonged to me. He visited every other Sunday, always with the same script. You look great, Mom. Are they treating you well? Dana and I were thinking, maybe next year, we sell the old storage unit stuff, simplify things further. Simplify. That word again, doing the same job it always did, smoothing over what was really happening, which was erosion. He'd taken over paying my remaining bills for convenience, which meant he'd also taken over seeing what came in. What he didn't understand was that Brookhaven's monthly operating lease payment went out from the facility's corporate office to Ashgrove Holdings, a separate, older financial pipe he'd never had reason to trace because he didn't know it existed. One Sunday, Jordan, a young assistant administrator at the facility, stopped by my room with paperwork about a resident satisfaction survey. She was maybe 26, sharp, overworked, the kind of person who actually reads the documents she's handed instead of just signing them. Mrs. Voss, she said, glancing at a printout. This is a strange question, but do you know anything about Ashgrove Holdings? Corporate keeps flagging your file because your last name matches a contact on an old lease amendment. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I asked her to sit down. I told her everything. Not to recruit an ally. I didn't need one. Not really. But because a young woman who reads documents carefully deserves to know when the numbers on her desk connect to a real person's life. Jordan's eyes widened somewhere in the middle of my explanation. Wait. You own the building we're standing in. I built the foundation for it before your parents met, probably, I said. She sat back slowly. Does your son know Brookhaven's corporate office has been trying to renegotiate the lease terms? They've been pushing for a rent reduction for months. Legal keeps stalling because they can't get a clear answer from ownership. That was new information, and it meant something important. Marcus wasn't just unaware I owned his mother's nursing home. He worked, unknowingly, adjacent to a business deal that could only be approved by me. The lease renegotiation meeting happened in Brookhaven's admin conference room on a Thursday afternoon, a room with a long table, a view of the parking lot, and, as it turned out, my son sitting in it. Marcus had recently taken a consulting contract with the regional management company that operated Brookhaven, a fact he'd mentioned casually at dinner weeks earlier, proud of himself for getting his foot in the door with a growing healthcare operator. He didn't know Ashgrove Holdings was the landlord he was there to negotiate with. He only knew he'd been asked to sit in as the family liaison for a significant resident and ownership stakeholder. I walked in with Priya beside me, folder in hand, wearing the navy blazer I used to wear to closings 30 years ago. Marcus's face did something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Confusion first, then disbelief, then the particular kind of pale that comes from realizing the ground under you has just been pulled sideways. Mom, he said. What? Why are you here? I'm the stakeholder, I said, sitting down across from him. Ashgrove Holdings. I believe you've been trying to reach ownership for months. Dana, seated beside him for moral support, went very quiet. You own this building, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. It was a man doing math he should have done years ago. Since 1987, I said. Your father and I bought it together. It's been generating income this entire time. Income, I might add, that helped cover a few of your business loans, back when you thought that money came from a trust nobody questioned too closely. Priya slid the folder across the table. Lease history, Ashgrove's ownership documents, and, quietly placed near the back, the letter Frank had written me. I'm not here to punish you, I said, and I meant it. I'm here because you try to make decisions about my life using information you didn't fully have, and I let you, because grief made me tired and love made me quiet. That's over now. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out for a moment. You moved me into a building, I said, assuming I had nothing left to stand on. I want you to understand something, Marcus. I never stopped standing. I just let you believe otherwise, because I was watching to see who you'd become when you thought no one was really paying attention. The silence in that room said more than any raised voice could have. I didn't evict my son from his consulting contract. I didn't tear up the lease out of spite. I didn't need to burn anything down to prove a point I'd already proven simply by walking into that room. What I did was quieter, and in some ways, harder for him to sit with. I told the regional management company I'd personally review all future lease terms. No exceptions, no delegations to Marcus or anyone connected to him. Ashgrove Holdings, effective that week, was mine again in practice, not just on paper. Priya helped me formally revoke the power of attorney Marcus held over the joint accounts from Frank's hospital stay, replacing it with a limited, transparent arrangement Renee agreed to co-oversee, at my request, not his. Renee flew in 2 days later. She sat with me in my room, in my building, and cried for reasons that had nothing to do with pity. I should have asked more questions, she said. I let him be the only voice I heard. You believe the version that was easiest to believe, I told her. Most people do. I did too, for longer than I'd like to admit. Marcus called 4 times that week. I let 2 of them go to voicemail. On the third, I answered. Mom, he said, voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of it. I believe you didn't know about the building, I said. But you knew you were making decisions about my life without asking me first. That part you knew perfectly well. He didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me something was finally shifting. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, no storming out of Brookhaven with my belongings in a huff. I stayed exactly where I was, because it turns out the nicest room in the building had always, technically, been reserved for the owner. I still live at Brookhaven, if you're wondering. Not because I have to, because I choose to, now, on my own terms, in a building I helped bring into existence before either of my children could walk. Marcus and I talk again, carefully, the way people rebuild something after a small earthquake, testing the foundation before trusting it with real weight. He apologized properly, eventually, without the word, but attached to the end of it. That mattered more to me than any amount of money ever could. Dana and I are polite. That's enough for now. Some relationships get rebuilt slowly, and some just get managed with grace. I've made my peace with which one this is. Renee visits more. She asks questions now instead of accepting summaries. I think some part of her is still working through the years she spent believing she wasn't needed, when the truth was simpler and sadder. She was just never the one anyone thought to worry about, and worry, in our family, had always been mistaken for love. Jordan still stops by some evenings, off the clock, just to talk. I've unofficially become something like a mentor to her, an old real estate woman teaching a young administrator to read the fine print in everything she signs. I told her once, only half joking, that reading the fine print probably saved my life the same way it saved my dignity. As for the letter Frank left me, I keep it in the drawer by my bed, in the room in the building he helped me buy, in the life we built when everyone still thought I was the quiet one who didn't understand paperwork. I understood it perfectly. I just chose, for a long time, not to say so out loud. My son moved me into a nursing home, thinking he was making a decision about a woman with nothing left to hold on to. He just didn't know I was still holding the deed.